Our story takes place in San Carlos, Mexico, a small town on the coast of the Sea of Cortez. Many have called San Carlos a hidden treasure. There are other things hidden here as well. I came to Mexico for scenic beauty and great diving, and the notion that in Mexico you're freer. If you've never lived here, it's hard to explain that feeling of freedom I speak of, and I reckon it's different for each expatriate that calls Mexico home. My personal favorite freedom? I can't drive 55 on the highways. I just can't do it. The consequences? I think I've been stopped a handful of times over 25 years for speeding. Never really got a ticket though. I negotiated a bribe with the officer right then and there and went happily about my business, confident in the knowledge that I love this country. So oftentimes we have the freedom to break the law here in Mexico with few or almost no consequences. The question is, how far are you willing to take your freedom? Would you take someone's money from them and give them false hope that you could cure their late-stage terminal cancer? Is that a freedom we should have in Mexico, or anywhere for that matter? That's a question I hope to answer in our exclusive San Carlos TV expose on David Walker. David Walker arrived in San Carlos sometime around 2002 and started a cancer treatment clinic called BioResMed, just a couple of blocks from my house. David tells a compelling story on YouTube about how he cured his own cancer. But before we take a look at Walker's video, let's go back in time to April of 2002 to the state of Washington, where the Federal Trade Commission filed a civil action against David Walker, seeking to enact a temporary restraining order to stop him from claiming he was able to cure cancer. After a court-appointed investigator started researching, the FTC decided it had more than enough evidence for a restraining order. One of the most striking claims on Walker's website at the time was that he stated he had a 95+ success rate over the past 40 years of peer-documented cases while conducting clinical studies with world leaders in cancer research. Now that is a mighty bold statement, and the FTC jumped all over it. But I feel I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. So let's hear David's side of the story. So, here is David Walker in his own words, brought to you by YouTube.
In March of '94, I went into emergency surgery for appendectomy. My appendix had blown up. And as a result of that, they found a grapefruit-sized tumor with over 300 different root stems going throughout my entire abdomen.
According to court documents and sworn testimony by Dr. Dustin Osborne, Walker's oncologist, that statement simply isn't true. Osborne, under oath mind you, testified that in March of 1994, Walker was diagnosed with Duke's C, third stage carcinoma of the colon, so there was no grapefruit-sized tumor in his abdomen.
I had treated him for what's called stage 3 colon cancer. He had a tumor in his large intestine. He was seen by the gastroenterology service. They made the biopsy. He was referred to a surgeon. After his surgery, he was then sent to me.
Walker goes on.
It had gone testicular to the kidneys. Later on, it had metastasis to the liver, not extremely severe, but once it reaches the liver, usually that's kind of you got 6 months type of a thing.
Again, sworn testimony by Dr. Dustin Osborne contradicts Walker.
He never had evidence of disseminated disease. That is, there was no evidence that it had spread to his liver or any other site in his body.
David Walker continues, and the story gets far more melodramatic.
I did chemotherapy for 6 months straight. At the end of that term, the side effects had taken pretty much a big toll, as a lot of people understand and have observed it or been through it themselves. And it was time to quit. My system was dying faster than the cancer was killing me. So the decision of mine was to walk away from cancer. And they said, if you did, you're not going to last long.
Well, let's face it, Dr. Osborne has a rather different recollection of the Walker case. Okay.
The treatment was not killing him, and he did not have any measurable cancer at the time that he took the chemo. It was all done as a preventative to keep the cancer from coming, or reduce the chances of the cancer coming back. He kept coming in for follow-up routinely in patients that have completed their treatment. I'll see them back every 3 months for the first year or two, and then we go to every 6 months for 5 years.
Yeah, well, it shows from the deposition that he kept in contact with you for several years after he received the treatment.
Yes. And he never did have evidence of recurrent cancer.
Are we talking about the same patient? How can there be two totally different versions of the same story? Walker stated on his website and his video that he did not return to see his doctors after he walked away from cancer and stopped chemo for 2 years. And when he went back for a checkup, his doctors were amazed that he was still alive. In fact, they thought he had died.
I was terrified to go back to my oncologist to find out if I still had cancer 2 years later. And I finally got up enough guts to go back, and I did, and was found that there was no cancer.
Now, Dr. Osborne testified under oath that Walker voluntarily stopped his chemo. It wasn't killing him, it was just giving him a rash on his hands, and that Walker came in for his follow-ups for at least 2 years after he stopped his chemotherapy. Remember, on his website, he made the audacious claim of a 95% plus success rate. Well, federal investigators quickly shot that claim to pieces. Here's what the investigator found. Walker could only document selling products to 127 consumers, not the advertised 745. And of those 127 consumers, the court investigator found that 18 people had died. So in fact, Walker's 2% mortality rate was untrue, and the mortality rate was at least 14%. But, and this is the important part, the investigators stopped making phone calls. They had already proved their case. What was the point of causing further emotional distress in the families of those deceased? They saw no need to call all 127 consumers. Walker continues to this day to tell people the government proved he had an 86% success rate. Welcome to the Walker Spin Zone. Let's go a little deeper, though, into the numbers, shall we? Of the 127 consumers who purchased Walker products, how many of them had cancer at all? And how many of them had late-stage cancers? What was Walker's true mortality rate? For all we know, it could have been 100%. We have no idea of knowing, since Walker did not keep records of that, even though he has stated many times in video that he kept great records.
Over a period of time, I kept good records. Being a biophysicist, I keep very good records on everything that I do.
Remember, what the FTC asked for were his clinical studies. But Walker couldn't produce clinical studies that he had never done. So what he did produce for the FTC were not the 40 years of, and we quote, peer-documented cases and clinical studies with world leaders that he advertised on his website, but invoices for products that he had sold. So Walker did keep good records, good financial records. And based on those records, the FTC decided Walker could easily afford to pay the $229,000 in fines levied upon him. I guess the financial records were simply more important than the records of who actually lived and who died. So it seems to me the only thing David Walker walked away from was the truth. The ugly truth that he didn't cure his own cancer. And that's exactly what the FTC decided. According to the Federal Trade Commission, David Walker lied not only about curing his own cancer, but also about the ability to cure cancer in others. Join us for part 2 next week on our San Carlos TV exclusive expose on David Walker, the Bulgarian connection. I'm Vince. Thanks for watching, and con el favor de Dios, we do hope to see you next week.